Welcome back.
Welcome back.
It feels
Man,
like it's been a while.
It has been a while.
It feels like, every time we go away for a couple weeks, coming back always feels like, oh yeah, this again, right?
Yeah, well, and the way that our release schedule works, it's almost like a month between episodes if you don't record an episode, because you record an episode and then a couple weeks happens, then a couple weeks of break, and then now we're back.
Yeah, time, bro. It's fucked.
Welcome to VCR, Vintage Cinema Rewind. We're bringing old movies to new viewers. I'm Blake.
We must make an idol of our fear, and that idol we shall call God. That is not at all the tone that he used, but it's the tone I chose to repeat that quote in.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, we are coming back swinging for the fences with a classic movie from the 50s, The Seventh Seal. It's a movie that's been on my list since the dawn of time, I think.
Yeah, mine too, actually. I saw a clip of this in film school like 12 years ago, and I was like, oh, interesting. And then, yeah, you know how it's funny, like some of these famous movies, you just kind of know, you can kind of describe them in one sentence. Like, for me, The Seventh Seal was always like, oh, that's the one with Max von Sydow where he plays chess with death, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've always kind of been fascinated by the idea of playing chess with death or with the devil or whatever, and like maybe it's because of the TV shows that we grew up on and like the parodies and references that kind of get brought up time and time again.
Like Norm Macdonald as Death.
Yeah.
When he breaks his ankle and Peter has to take up the scythe.
Well, and I was trying to think if there was like a Futurama thing that happened with the devil and related to this. And I'm not sure that there's a direct one-to-one.
Oh, you mean where Fry wins the robot devil's hands so he can fiddle to impress Leela?
Yeah. But I think it's more so actually like the Looney Tunes and the Warner Brothers, like and the Warner sister Dot. All of them kind of have more references to that. So there's like,
do they? Okay.
Like deep stuff in my childhood that I remember this movie being from. And like, I've always kind of thought, oh, like that's such a cool idea to play death in a game of chess for your life, basically. And like, what kind of big existential ideas would you have a conversation about while you're like opposite
while
death
we're
at a
having
table?
this chess match? Yeah. I really like the idea of death just as a character that you can interact with.
Yes.
I want to bring up Terry Pratchett in his famous Discworld series. Death appears as a recurring character, and like the way he characterizes death is kind of this like solemn, lonely guy who's just doing his job is like really, it's really well done. Like honestly, I could very easily hijack the Seventh Seal podcast talking about Terry Pratchett's death.
Well, and it's probably heavily inspired by this, right?
Probably, yeah. It's funny. There's this one book, Mort, where this kid becomes apprenticed to death, and Mort's talking to death, and he says something like, oh, but like you kill people, and death gets really offended. He's like, excuse me, I don't kill people. I just collect their souls. Like, it'd be a bloody stupid world if people died without getting killed, wouldn't it?
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm glad we did this one because, I wanted to cross this one off the list. It's a foreign film from 1957 that's in black and white. Like, it's not something that, I necessarily seek out on a regular basis. So this is a good time to get an excuse to watch something that I don't think would be top of my list, but it's always been on my list to watch.
Certainly, yeah. I'm glad I finally crossed this off my particular list too.
Yeah.
Much like Death going down his immortal list for all of us.
Yeah. So let's get into the plot and go from there.
Okay. Max von Sydow plays Antonius Block, which is quite a name for a main character.
Yes. Sir, well, not Sir Antonius Block, but he is a knight.
He is a knight, yes. So he is a knight returning home from the Crusades with his squire. And it's actually, like, if I can dovetail my own description for a second, I really like the way the movie opens, where we have a long shot of these two horses standing side by side. Then we cut into the beach, and Antonius and his squire apparently got drunk playing chess and fell over in the middle of the night. I had so many questions. I was like, what happened last night?
Right.
Like, you know, it's like that Paul Rudd meme where it's like, what the hell happened here? So anyways, Antonius wakes up after a night of chess and heavy drinking, apparently, only to be greeted by Death himself, the man in black, who tells Antonius that he has come for him. And in an effort to maybe prolong his own wretched existence, Antonius challenges death to a game of chess.
Yes, in which the rules are essentially that for as long as the chess game goes on, Antonius gets to continue living, and if Antonius block does end up defeating death, that he would get to continue living.
It's like, I'll meet you at the inn tonight. We'll play a couple more moves. The whole kind of framing device that we sort of learn later is that Antonius is on his way home to his castle to meet with his long lost wife, who he hasn't seen in like 10 years, I guess. So that's where he's heading, and he's kind of just prolonging the game.
I would almost say that this is part of, at this point in time, probably the whole like premise here of playing chess against death. Like, this is, at this point, what you and I knew about this movie and what most other people probably expect this movie to be going forward.
Mm-hmm.
And on one hand, I would say that like death represented in this film is maybe one of the great antagonists of a film of all time. Like, I would put this in the same. We mentioned, you and I were talking separately about No Country for Old Men earlier today, but I would put this representation of death to be on par with like the Javier Bardem, Anton Chigurh kind of representation of a psychotic serial killer, essentially, right?
I don't know that I would agree. I agree that like death as he appears in this movie is incredibly like imposing and incredibly creepy, but like he never seems outright malicious to me.
But I'm not, I guess I don't mean it in that sense. I mean it's just like the iconic performance and the iconic idea of representing death on screen I put on par with like the iconic portrayal of a psychotic man who is just like an unstoppable, unrelenting killing machine.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting. So he challenges death to a game of chess, and death kind of just shrugs like, yeah, whatever. Like,
right?
You know, he has a couple lines throughout the movie where it's like, you know, this is inevitable anyway, right? You know, like you can't escape me forever.
Yeah,
yeah.
And it's just like it's so nonchalant, and like the way that death just kind of like is like, yeah, all right, whatever. Like he's just a very relaxed, like he's like, I think some other portrayals of death and the devil can be like, you know, a lot more menacing or chaotic and
a little
bombastic.
Yeah, like if you've seen Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, the death character in that movie is very like super villainy, right?
Right.
Which is fun, but this death is very just like
melancholy, almost
kind of
like
I
resigned.
I almost kind of saw it as like, you know, when you're like at a family function you don't really want to be at, and like a little kid ropes you into a game. That's kind of what I thought Death's vibe was. It was just kind of like, oh, all right, like sure, why not? Like,
yeah,
he seemed like a little bit charmed by the whole thing, but also just a little bit bored.
Yeah.
And as the movie goes on, it's kind of like, all right, like come on, we got to wrap this up.
Mm-hmm. This is the thing. So you've kind of given us the brief summary of like how this movie opens, but what's really interesting is how the story kind of continues on from there, right? Like it's a story about a group of characters who are navigating this medieval period in which the Black Plague has scourged Sweden, and you know the main characters are coming back from the Crusade and reckoning with their impact there or lack of impact there.
It kind of feels very like almost post-apocalyptic at different points.
Yes,
you know, like
yeah.
It's just nobody's having a good time.
It feels like, in a sense, that I think that this movie is another one of those movies where it kind of becomes relevant during certain periods of human existence. And I feel like, you know, the post-COVID era, like
I did
watching
want to bring that
this
up.
It kind of like definitely, you feel like this movie was made in response to that, even though it was made like 70 years prior almost.
Yeah.
It's super interesting to watch, to kind of come back to this almost 70 years later.
A lot has been said about this film and like the various themes, primarily like, you know, the silence of God, which ties into the famous passage about the seventh seal being opened and there being a silence in heaven for half an hour. I always found that passage really charming, in that it says, you know, blah, 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 and there was a silence in heaven for about half an hour. I just like the phrasing of that. Like some guys guessing at the time, like it's probably like half an hour that it was quiet. Anyways, like, oh, I don't know, something like that. Yeah, a lot is said in this movie about like, you know, how religion kind of doesn't really give us the answers we need. And, you know, during these troubled times. And yeah, it really does hit differently in like a post-COVID world. Like for instance, they make a big song and dance in this movie about how a lot of people believe that the Black Death was a plague sent by God, like God's wrath.
Right.
And we saw that with COVID as well.
Yep.
Yeah, so people really don't change that much, do they?
Nope.
No.
We just live on a big old wheel.
I mean, you can take the peasant out of the person, but you can't take the person out of the peasant.
I think sometimes when you watch like an old movie, or I think it's mostly movies and art and stuff, and part of it probably is because it's a contemporary take on something that is almost unknowable in a sense, like unless you directly translate a work of like Shakespeare or something, like, you know, we're putting modern ideas and sensibilities into like something that's old. And so it feels like sometimes I think that we're basically just on a big wheel that's turning, and like nothing changes, but everything changes, but everything stays the same kind of thing.
Nothing really changes. Yeah.
Yeah. And then other times it's like, it's a question of, are we just kind of putting our own fears and questions and everything like
are
on.
We making an idol of our fear and calling it God, perhaps? Oh,
exactly. So anyway, so this is the thing that, and I'm going to get into characters and people you may know now, because the thing with this movie is it's almost like an ensemble cast, and it kind of like dovetails into like all of these individual stories that kind of come together and kind of mingle throughout the film. So we've talked about like Antonius Block and Johns, the squire, and their kind of a little bit about their relationship, but then how death kind of intrudes on what they're up to at this point in time. And as a side note, Antonius Block, played by Max von Sydow.
Max von Sydow. Esbern from Skyrim.
He's like in everything. I feel like he's like the old stoic man of the last 20 years, basically, right? Like he was in the Game of Thrones original series as the Three-Eyed Raven. You'd know him from like The Force Awakens. There was something else like Shutter Island. He's just kind of a face that, you know, I instantly recognize. And this is kind of like obviously a very young.
Yes, I was going to say, speaking of Max von Sydow's face, it's so surreal seeing him as a young man.
Yeah, he's a very striking guy. Like, there's even like back then there was like some sort of stoicism that he had.
Like not exactly good looking, not exactly ugly, but just a face you kind of can't take your eyes off of.
Yeah,
you're just like, hey, it's that guy.
Yeah, a face almost like chiseled in stone, like outside of time.
Yeah,
you know?
Kind of. Like he definitely, you know, kudos to Ingmar Bergman for taking one look at this guy and be like, you're a knight from the Crusades, and you're kind of over it.
Yeah, and he's actually popped up in other stuff that we've done already. Like he was in Conan the Barbarian. He's like the main guy in The Exorcist, which is wild.
Oh, I forgot he was the Exorcist.
Yeah,
he was the guy.
He's Father Merrin.
Father Merrin.
Yeah, which I've actually never seen The Exorcist start to finish. So.
Really? I just watched it last October for Halloween.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
I was thinking maybe we do that for this year, but maybe we do something different, I guess.
Yeah, maybe. I'd watch it again, you know.
Well, there's so many good horror movies out there though. Like horror, you can just kind of like throw a dart at a dartboard and like of different years and just pick like three different
Throw a dart at a dartboard. It bounces off that dartboard, hits another dartboard, and then there's all the movies you want to see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway,
I should say that you showed me a horror movie a couple months ago that might just make it onto my top 5.
Ooh, wow.
Spoilers.
I also wanted to mention, because like the nature of this movie and like the expectation versus kind of what I got out of this, like I found that it's funny because I don't think that Antonius Block and Death actually even have the most screen time necessarily.
I have thoughts about that. I did really want to bring that up.
Yeah, they're like once you actually watch this movie, and like that's my expectation, is that I honestly expected this movie to be like 2 hours of conversation
with Death
with Death, whereas it actually like those two are actually like they're the A plot, but like they're the third or fourth mains in this movie. Like
kind of. I don't even know that I'd call them the A plot. I mean, we start and end with them, so yeah, I guess maybe an A- plot.
Yeah.
I don't know. There was a lot of characters in this movie, and it's funny. And you know, this isn't a fault to the movie, but like things become exaggerated in your mind. You're like, oh, it's the movie where he plays chess with death.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm watching like, a blacksmith pursuing revenge against like, the man who had sex with his wife, and I'm watching this scene like, sure isn't a lot of chess in this scene, is there?
I had the exact same thought. And you and I talked a little bit about almost wanting to watch this movie a second time and not necessarily having time to do that before we recorded, but I think this movie is going to be a little bit rewarding to go back to. So not only is this primer episode for those of you who have never seen this movie, I think this is maybe a bit of a primer for like those who have seen this movie once and maybe almost didn't quite get it. Like I feel like I haven't fully grasped everything that is the Seventh Seal yet.
Yeah, I think we're only on the second or third seal, but there's 3 or 4 more.
Nice.
And then there will be a silence in this podcast for about half an hour.
Yeah, I think that also, like, because it's an ensemble cast and there's so many different characters and so much going on, I think for me, there was one character that felt like primarily the main character of this film, and that, to me, was the Squire. Mm-hmm. Whereas I think that on different viewings, there might be other characters that I might focus on the most or more than the Squire kind of thing. Like, it's an interesting movie I think this is a relatively, weirdly enough, rewatchable film.
Weirdly enough, yeah. Very rewatchable. And, like, doesn't overstay its welcome. It's about 90 minutes.
Yeah. Which is fantastic. Like, a movie that's this challenging really should be, like, nice and short.
Nice and toy. Yeah.
And then, Joff and Mia are the traveling artists who are also, like, prominent figures in this film. Like you mentioned, the blacksmith. Like, there's a whole, like, cast of characters.
It's a motley crew. It's a troupe, you might say.
Yeah, like, normally I talk more about the actors, but other than Max von Sydow, like, not many contemporary audiences are going to know a lot of the Swedish actors who take place in this because this is a Swedish movie, and it's actually directed by probably the most famous Swedish director ever, Ingmar Bergman.
Yeah.
We haven't actually done an Ingmar Bergman film yet on this podcast. This is actually my first time watching one of his movies.
It's kind of funny. We hung out over the weekend. And again, Blake and I do hang out. We are friends. And like...
No, we're not.
Yeah, that's right. I'm just keeping up appearances for the folks at home. Yeah, I mean, I offered to show you a picture of my dick earlier, and you refused. And frankly, I was deeply upset. But anyways, you can cut that out if you want.
No, I won't. I refuse to.
Good, I didn't want you to.
Just like your penis.
Oh, I see what you did there. Yeah, we were hanging out over the weekend, and I was like, this is a Fellini movie, right? You're like, no, it's a Bergman movie. I was like, oh, yeah, Bergman.
Mm-hmm. He's probably one of the most prolific directors ever. I think he has like almost 50, if not 50 movies to his name. It's 48 feature-length films. So,
Jesus Christ.
Yes, and many other short films. So, like, so he's on par with, like, a director like Sidney Lumet, right? Like, very prolific, like, constantly working his shit out.
And I respect that in a creator who just kind of, they treat it like a job, you know, in the sense that they're just like, yeah, it's time to make another movie.
At the same time, though, this is a director that, like, was really existential, and like he's thinking about a lot. Like he's grappling with a lot of ideas, and like I almost like, even though I had an expectation for this movie, I almost think that like it was even more complex and challenging than I even expected.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad you brought up that word, the big E word, existential. Like there is a lot of angsting and musing about like the meaninglessness and the futility of life and like finding a purpose and like when death is casting a long, long shadow over us all.
And I even want to talk about too, like when we get into the deep dive, maybe how this post-World War II era kind of played a little bit or a lot of into the themes and ideas of this movie as well, and like where Ingmar Bergman was at this point in his life as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because like there's something to be said about the opener of this film opening with a knight who's essentially burnt out and without meaning.
Yeah, like, and getting drunk on the beach with his squire playing chess. I love that opening.
Yeah,
like,
yeah, for sure.
I do love to, like, you know, death just kind of appear. I don't know what that trick is where like, you know, he just kind of materializes. I don't know what the film trick is called. He just kind of materializes on frame.
Yeah.
And it's just like, who are you? I'm death. And then it's like, long have I traveled by your side.
Yeah.
And then he's like, are you ready? Death's like, are you ready? He's like, like my body is, but my like spirit isn't.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. So getting into who this movie is for, does it hold up? I'm going to skip by that for a second and actually say my one scene to sell the movie is actually just the opener of the film.
The opener's pretty good.
Yeah, it's like it's exactly what you're expecting out of this movie, so why not just like start with that? And if those expectations, like if you're not interested in that and the beautiful cinematography and like the idea of death showing up here and everything, then this movie isn't for you. And that's kind of it. The other thing that's really interesting is that the movie's shot in like 4:3 instead of 16:9.
Oh, really? I didn't notice that.
You didn't notice that it was like basically square, like it looked like.
I just thought it was an old movie. I just thought that's how they shot all their old movies.
No, I'm pretty sure. I mean, like most movies are shot to be played in a movie theater, but this one was like a box. Like it was like almost like made for TV when you and I were kids.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Apparently, this script was adapted from a play. Maybe that was like an intentional choice to make it look more like a
interesting. Yeah,
like a stage.
I don't know. Yeah, I didn't actually read anything about that online, but anyway, I don't know. Did you look up one scene to sell the movie?
I did not. Is there a movie clips for this?
No, there's not.
Okay,
so.
I didn't think so. I would have to say the scene where it's kind of a funny scene. Well, it's not. So the knight and Johns, the squire, arrive at this podunk shithole medieval town where they're going to burn this woman for consorting with the devil.
Right.
And he goes to confess to the priest.
Mm-hmm.
And he talks. That's where the famous line, we must make an idol of our fear and call it God. And he, says quite a lot and blah, blah, blah. And really the whole conceit is that the priest is actually just death hanging out there, right?
Yep. It's very obvious, too.
Yeah, it's funny when he whispers to the priest that, like, he's like, I saw death and we're playing chess. And, this is what I'm going to do for my next move. And then Death, like, turns around and looks at him. And he's just like, you deceived me. And it's like, no, he didn't, you dumb shit. Like, how did you not notice that was him?
Yeah, very obviously him.
Yeah, so I'm making fun. But, like, no, I think that's where, like, we really see the real themes of this movie. Like, this poor guy just wrestling with his own mortality and just the meaninglessness of it all.
Yeah, for sure. On that note, like, who is this movie for? And do you think this holds up to watch almost 7 years later?
I don't know that it totally holds up, frankly, just for a modern viewer. I mean, that said, though, I don't know, because, like, you and I are both in our early 30s, and, like, we've both lost a couple people,
mm-hmm.
And it's not like you and I are old men, but we're getting older. So, like, I don't know that this movie would have done anything for me 5 or 6 years ago, but now at 31, about to be 32, I'm a little like, ooh, yeah. Interesting.
I think this is a really interesting discussion too, because my thoughts where I kind of landed on this is I think that this holds up in the same way that going and seeing a play that was written 50 or 70 years ago holds up, because the movie it's entertaining, and I thought, like, there's even moments that I laughed out loud. Like, there's some really genuinely funny moments.
There's some zingers in this movie.
But it's a movie that's about ideas and themes. And so if you're somebody who likes to go to the theater and see something challenging, like that, that's timeless in its ideas and its themes, then I think you're going to have a little bit more mileage with this than somebody who's like just purely looking for popcorn entertainment.
Yeah, it is kind of like an old ass Shakespeare play, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Even in terms of like tone and subject matter.
Yep.
Although I don't know that death ever showed up in Shakespeare.
Oh, I feel like he did.
Yeah, probably, right?
Yeah.
Sound off of the comments.
I'm not sure, but like I just feel like he did.
Probably, right? I feel like Shakespeare would have.
I mean, even if he didn't, he'd still grappled with death with like Hamlet and stuff, right?
Because everything is grappling with death, right?
Yeah. So
Oof.
That's kind of where I land on it, is like, I don't know that this holds up necessarily 100% as a movie, but as like a time capsule of an interesting like theater troupe kind of like theater kids play that's been filmed. I think it is kind of interesting in that sense to come in it from that angle. And again, I want to say that, like, even though this movie is in black and white, it's maybe one of the most visually stunning films that I've seen this year.
Yeah, like in terms of like the framing and the cinematography, they do a really, really good job with things.
Yeah, like it's genuinely like really easy to watch this movie in that
Mm,
sense. Like, I thought it was so goddamn beautiful. Like, I actually wrote down, I was like, I actually think this would have hurt the movie not being in black and white.
right. It's funny. There's a moment kind of later on where this guy, he's kind of freaking out, and the forest is framed in such a way where like we see a bunch of trees, and then kind of like to the left of the screen, there's like a little clearing, and the guy kind of thrashes around, then falls. And I thought, oh wow, like he would have had to fall in a really specific place. I wonder how many takes this took.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Good job, guys. We did it.
I think that the black and white also makes it feel like bleaker, like more nightmarish, because, like we dream in black and white generally.
Yeah.
I think that, as well, like, because this movie takes place at a very specific period in time, like the medieval period, and this is a really low budget film, there's kind of like a minimalist kind of approach to it as well.
Yeah.
And I think doing it in black and white makes it feel more like that era than it, like, I think if this was full of color, it would feel a little bit more hokey almost.
Kind of. Yeah, I don't know. I was actually surprised to learn how cheap this movie was.
Yeah.
Cuz like it looks good.
It looks incredible. Like,
Yeah.
and that's kind of, I guess, the thing is, like, you don't need necessarily a massive budget to make something look fantastic if you just, like, have a really good cinematographer.
Yeah, and like you have the right props and choose the right angles. It's kind of like the Godzilla -1 angle, right? Where it's like this is what $10 million can actually get you.
Yeah,
If you're
yeah,
not
it's
a
all
shithead about it.
it all comes down to vision and just like letting the creatives tackle their vision, I
Be
guess.
creative, yeah.
Yeah.
Huh.
So, anyway, when to watch. This is like absolutely a Sunday movie. Like, this is a contemplative,
After
like, challenging
church.
film.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah, for sure. Even on that note, yeah, like, this is a deeply religious film, which I wasn't necessarily expecting. I probably should have, because it's the subject matter we
Yeah.
talked
I mean,
about.
it's critical of religion, but it's religious.
Yeah, yeah. Where to watch right now? I believe it's streaming on the Criterion channel, and that's pretty much the only spot you can get it right now.
I did find a copy of it on YouTube just for free. Like there's a YouTube
nice.
video where it's the whole thing and it's got subtitles and everything.
Oh wow.
I don't know how much longer that's going to be up, but I did not rent this on YouTube for
I
once.
believe that I did actually rent this one on YouTube because I didn't see that. But I also, like, the thing is with movies that, well, we're recommending it to people, like, I like to get a good version, generally speaking, of the film that we're going to watch, because I want to see it in, like, a way that's going to be accessible. And I also want to get the best possible version generally of a film, because, again, like, if I was getting this in, like, I don't know, 480p or something like that, like, if it was like a real shitty quality, like, I would have missed a certain aspect.
You would
of
have
this
missed
movie.
quite a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just the beauty of this film is, like, I can't understate that. Like, it looks fantastic.
It does look fantastic.
Anyway, I think that's it for the primer episode of the Seventh Seal.
Yep, I think that's it.
Yeah, I feel good about the start of this. Like, I think that this is a movie that's absolutely not for everybody, but I'm glad I watched it.
I can feel death's cold embrace closing around my heart, but for just one moment, his grip has loosened,
Ooh.
and I feel the warmth of life rushing through me again.
All right, cool. Well,
let's end there.
we'll see you next week for the deep dive into the Seventh Seal. We are coming up on your choice film.
That's right,
next.
bitches. I'm turning 32, and I don't look a day older than 31 and 11 months.
Do you know what we're doing yet?
Actually, yeah. I think I've decided, and I wrestled with this for a little bit, but I think I want to do my all-time favorite Batman movie, Batman Mask of the Phantasm.
I'm so excited to do
the
this
animated one. Honestly, that movie's probably in my top 10. I actually rewatched it last October, and it holds up. I had a really good time. Yeah.
I'm genuinely really excited. Like, obviously, you know that Batman's my favorite superhero of all time. Like,
yes.
I'm a big Chris Nolan Batman trilogy guy. Like, I grew up, like, my dad always had the Batman movies with, like, Michael Keaton and everybody else.
I was kind of debating, like, do I want to do this movie or do I want to do, like, Batman 1989, the Tim Burton one? But, like, it's my fucking birthday and I want to do Mask of the Phantasm.
I'm excited to do the Mask of the Phantasm because I haven't, like, gone back to any of those 80s and 90s Batman movies since
I haven't either, yeah.
Like, probably under 12. Well, it's the last time I watched it.
I think I rewatched it when I was like 16, but like we're going on like 14, 15 years now.
Yeah, like I'm over 20 years since I probably watched any of those.
So
But I haven't seen Mask of the Phantasm ever, and I've heard like that it's a masterpiece. So
Oh, okay. I showed it to my last partner, and I love showing this movie to people.
yeah,
So,
I'm looking forward to it. I'm
yeah,
genuinely looking forward to it.
nice.
All right, cool. Well, that's it for the Primer episode. We'll see you next time.
Bye.